Hey, everybody, welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And this week we are talking about spooky swamp monsters, swamp creatures. We had talked a little bit about different types of Bigfoot a few weeks ago. My buddy Scott and I, Scott Perry was on the show. We were talking about different types of Bigfoot. And that sort of stemmed from a question my girlfriend Rebecca had asked me about what is the difference between Yeti, the abominable snowman, and Bigfoot. So we kind of did a show where we talked about some of the differences between different types of Bigfoot in the country. We didn't touch too much on the Yeti. John and I had done a show last week about the Abominable Snowman of the Himalayas, which is a movie, a fictional movie, but we do talk a little bit about the actual Yeti legend in there. So this week I thought I'd focus more on swamp monsters because we talked about that, and I've never really done swamp monsters on the show before. And again, some people will say they're just different types of Bigfoot, but I've mainly covered the Northeast. So Bigfoot in New York, like the Adirondacks. I've done New Jersey. I've done Connecticut, Pennsylvania, like near Gettysburg, and I've done Seattle. I did a show about Bigfoot near Seattle a few weeks ago. So I wanted to really focus this week on swamp monsters. So like the Honey Island swamp monster down in Louisiana. So all the swamp monsters I'm going to deal with today, these sightings, these Bigfoot sightings, are from Louisiana and the eastern side of Louisiana, so near New Orleans and Honey Island Swamp, and we'll get into that. But that's what we're going to be talking about this week. So hope you guys are having a good week so far, and we're going to get into some spooky swamp monster stories today. Hope you enjoy. So before I get into these specific stories, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Honey Island swamp monster. And this is from Wikipedia. And I didn't want to do a whole show on the Honey Island swamp monster. I wanted to kind of just, again, talk about some sightings in that area. But I will talk a little bit about the Honey Island swamp monster before we get into the main stories. So the Honey Island swamp monster, also known as the Cajun Sasquatch, and in Cajun French, Le Bête Noire, is an ape-like humanoid cryptid creature similar to descriptions of Bigfoot, purported to inhabit the Honey Island swamp in St. Tammany Parish, Louisiana. So in Louisiana, instead of having counties, they have parishes. So you're going to hear a lot of different parishes instead of counties. It has become part of Louisiana folklore, with many swamp tour companies in the area capitalizing on its alleged existence, which is considered unlikely by scientists. I mean, it's Bigfoot, so. The description: creatures commonly described by alleged witnesses as a large bipedal humanoid about 7 feet tall, covered with gray hair, having yellow or red eyes, and accompanied by a putrid odor. So to stop for a second, it sounds very similar to a typical Bigfoot or Sasquatch, a little bit on the shorter side, though. Most Bigfoot sightings, they're talking 8, 9 feet. Sometimes you hear 7. But with swamp monsters and swamp creatures and Bigfoot in the South areas here, skunk apes and things like that, you're usually hearing reports on the shorter side. So 7 feet, 6 feet, 6.5 feet. You're not really getting the 8, 9, 10 foot tall, huge Bigfoot that you sometimes see like in the Pacific Northwest. So let me continue here. Other local names for the creature include the Louisiana Wookiee and the Thing. Alleged plaster casts of footprints, said to be from the creature, showcase 4 toes, not a natural trait found in primates who possess 5. Claims of its existence are generally not considered credible, including by scientists familiar with the area like ecologist Paul Wagner and his wife Sue. Neither they nor their Cajun guide, Robbie Charbonnet, report having seen any valid evidence beyond anecdotes and possible forgeries. So the feet for the Honey Island swamp monster look a little weird. There's 4 toes. There's 3 prominent ones and one on the side. I'm going to throw a picture up here so you can see if you're watching. It's kind of a cross between like a human foot and an alligator foot. So it's very weird. It's definitely not a typical Bigfoot footprint that you would normally see. So I'll go down into the history. The first claim sighting was in 1963 by Harlan Ford, a retired air traffic controller who had taken up wildlife photography. After his death in 1980, a reel of Super 8 film showing the creature was found among his belongings. And I'll throw up a still here. I can't really find the video, but if I can, I'll throw it in here. Today, the creature is still purported to inhabit the swamp and the bayous along the Pearl River. Local lore tells of a train crash that occurred near the swamp in the early 20th century, in which a traveling circus lost chimpanzees who adapted to the environment and offer a potential explanation as to the creature's origins. Now, this is something we hear a lot with Bigfoot stories. There's always the mystery circus or circus train or traveling circus that lost a gorilla or a chimpanzee, and that's what people are seeing and mistaking for Bigfoot. And it's almost like the swamp gas are UFOs of the Bigfoot world. It's just, UFOs are just swamp gas and or weather balloons. And, Bigfoot is always it's either a bear or it's an escaped gorilla from a local zoo or a traveling circus. So it just, how many traveling circuses have lost chimps and apes over the years? Just very strange. Um, it was the subject of an episode of In Search Of called The Swamp Monster. I loved In Search Of. That's kind of what got me into the paranormal, among other things. But it was a huge um, influence on me growing up. Me and my dad would always watch In Search Of and all these other, mysterious monsters and all these weird uh, paranormal shows and shows about weird creatures. And that's kind of what got me into this. But the creature overall does resemble what people talk about as a Bigfoot. Um, you hear about the yellow or the red eyes, the putrid odor. So skunk ape comes to mind. You don't hear too much of the odor so much in the north. I mean, you do hear it, but again, in the south, in Florida, it's the skunk ape because it has such a revolting smell. So there's just a little overview of the Honey Island swamp monster. They're saying the first claim sighting was in 1963. I'm guessing there's probably historical accounts that go back further than that. Uh, but this is basically what sort of prompted the Honey Island swamp monster. And some people think it was a hoax. Like I said, I'll see if I can splice some video in here from Harlan Ford's video, his film of the creature. And again, it's a blob squatch. It's in the distance. It's grainy footage. Patterson Gimlin footage is very clear. This Ford footage is not. There's something there. There's something moving, but it could be any number of things. So it doesn't garner the same respect as like the Patterson Gimlin footage does. So yeah, so there's a Honey Island swamp monster. I'm going to move on over to the BFRO report database as I often do. And again, disclaimer, I'm not this is in no way supporting the BFRO or disparaging the BFRO. I just read the reports that are out there. As I've said in previous episodes, some people have horrible things to say about the BFRO and they lie and they twist and contort the stories. And then other people have told me, no, I submitted my story and that's exactly what you see on the website. So, take everything with a grain of salt. It's Bigfoot after all. So you always got to take everything with a grain of salt when it comes to the big hairy fella. But I'm going to read some cool stories and we'll do some analysis of them. Okay, so before I get to the stories, I just wanted to show you guys real quick. This is Louisiana. These are all the parishes in Louisiana, the counties. Most of these places only have one or two sightings. Grant County has four. Natchitoches, I don't know if I'm saying that right, has three. Rapides has nine. But most of these counties or parishes have no sightings or just one or two. Every story I'm going to read from tonight, I picked a couple of different counties, parishes, and each one of those only had one story. So you're getting the one story from each of those parishes. And so I just wanted to show you guys that because when I was at Washington on here a couple of weeks ago for the Seattle episode, very different story. I mean, most of the counties had a couple of sightings at least, if not many, many more. So let us move on to the first story. All right, so story number one. This one actually takes place in Honey Island Swamp. And this is from St. Tammany Parish. Again, the parishes there are what we call counties in most of the states. So this happened in the year 1980 or 1981. Person can't remember. Hunters witness a large, dark, man-like creature pull a stump from the ground. Location details. In the area of Louisiana known as Honey Island Swamp. I was told this by my stepfather and stepbrother. They lived near this area before we met. The sighting was beside a river that runs through the swamp. I do not recall the name of it. Maybe you know. Observed. My stepbrother had a friend who he considered a brother and was considered a son to my stepfather. He and his dad hunted frequently in Honey Island Swamp. I'm told there were very few who knew the area as they did. They were hunting one day. It was cloudy and misting. They were walking up to the river when they heard a splash. They turned to see a dark, hairy creature, very muscular, standing with its back to them at the river's edge. The creature then pulled a cypress stump out of the mud and threw it into the river. They froze and were dumbstruck. They guessed it caught wind of them because it turned to look directly at them and then walked briskly away down the river's edge. They went to the spot where the creature was standing and saw large, human-like footprints, much larger than a man's print. They were about 75 yards away from the creature. The description of the creature was what I've written, plus they said they could tell when it turned around that it had parts on the face with no hair around the nose and mouth area. They stated it was between 6 to 7 feet tall and very heavy. The thing that stood out to them was the fact that it pulled the stump from the mud. They said it had to be very strong to do that. The father is a very stoic person. I have met his family on several occasions since my stepbrother is so close to them. The son, of course, was glad to verify the story, but the father didn't want to talk much about it other than to say, I know what I saw. The story did not waver one bit from what my stepbrother told me and his friend told me several months later. So they were out deer hunting. This was in a swamp. So there's no follow-up investigation for this one. I don't know if an investigator hasn't gotten to it. It's clearly a secondhand story, but a few interesting things in here. And the first one that you may have noticed is their description of the creature. They're saying it was very muscular, so not the bulky, kind of gorilla-like figure that we know of when we think of Bigfoot, like Patty, the Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot, or something from the Pacific Northwest, or even in the Northeast. It's more muscular and not bulky, and between 6 to 7 feet tall. Now I'm 6'1", so that is tall for a person. Not extremely tall, but that's pretty short for a Bigfoot, 6 to 7 feet. So, if you want to call it down the middle, 6.5 feet, not very tall for a Bigfoot, but obviously very strong. If this thing pulled a tree stump out of the mud, that's got to be pretty strong. So, again, this is a secondhand story. It's a humanoid creature. It looked at them. They saw it pull a stump. So was this a bear? Probably not. I don't know if a bear could stand upright and pull a stump out of the mud. 6 to 7 feet tall is in the bear range of height. But what are the odds that a bear is going to be in a swamp pulling a tree stump out of the mud and throwing it into the river? Again, this person is saying the father is a very stoic person. And he didn't want to talk much about it other than to say, I know what I saw. And this is what you hear a lot from witnesses. They don't care if you believe them or not. They know what they saw. And a lot of times they don't want to talk about it too much. They'll tell the story and then they want to move on. It's just they get it off their chest and say, this is what I saw. I know what I saw. I saw Bigfoot, or I saw the Honey Island swamp monster. I saw a creature. And you want to believe me? You believe me. That's great. If you don't want to believe me, don't believe me. So an interesting story. It's unfortunate that it's a secondhand telling. I guess these people didn't want to come online and tell it, but I'm glad that this person did tell the story. So very interesting. Again, Honey Island Swamp happened actually in the swamp, and the creature, true to statistics, it was shorter than a typical Bigfoot, between 6 and 7 feet, not very tall. Again, if this is a man in a suit, it's very easily a man in a suit. You have something that's 9 feet tall. It's harder to believe that that's a man in a suit. You'd have to find somebody who's 8.5 feet tall to fit into that suit. So 6 to 7 feet, that is within human range, but it also fits in with many descriptions of these creatures in the South being a little bit on the shorter side in Bigfoot height range. So 6 to 7 feet tall. Very interesting. Okay, so here at story number two, this is from Livingston Parish. This is Trapper Experiences Nighttime Vocalizations. So not a sighting, but some vocalizations. And this is from winter of either 97, 98, January, Livingston Parish. Location details withheld for confidentiality. Nearest town is Holden. Nearest road is Highway 1036. Observed. I was setting some coon traps on the edge of a power line next to a wooded area after dark. I had some sardines or some kind of fish with me for bait. I was using fence staples to stake the traps to the roots of trees. I had finished hammering in the staples on the last trap and was baiting the trap with the fish when I heard something walking towards me out in the woods. I don't remember if I could tell if it was walking on two legs or not, but I thought it was strange that any wild animal would approach me when I had just finished hammering staples. I backed out into the power line and stood by a power pole to see if whatever it was would come out of the woods, but it wouldn't. It stayed back about 10 yards from the edge of the woods, walking back and forth. I had a small flashlight with me, and I decided to try and shine whatever it was. I pointed the light in the direction of the footsteps and turned it on. I couldn't see anything because of the undergrowth, but whatever it was started whooping and ran off. I was also followed out of the woods after dark one night later that year by what must have been the same thing, because when I shined my light in its direction, it whooped and ran off just like before. I didn't see anything that time either due to the undergrowth. I've lived in this area all my life, and I've never heard anything make a noise like that. I'm not saying this was a Bigfoot. I don't have any idea what it was. We have deer and coyotes in this area, but I don't think either of those made whooping sounds. Maybe some of you know or have an idea of what this could have been. I would appreciate it if anybody could shed some light on this. No other witnesses. This was around 6 or 7 p.m. He said it was after dark. The environment was pastures, power lines, pipelines, some areas of dense undergrowth, and swampy bottomland. So again, a swamp monster. Some interesting things here that really caught my attention. One, he's talking about an animal approaching him while he's been hammering. So this is a guy who's hammering metal staples, making a racket, so this is not attractive to deer or coyotes or, they're going to kind of be spooked by this and run off. So that's number one. The interesting thing that really caught my eye was it stayed back about 10 yards from the edge of the woods, walking back and forth. So here you hear again this pacing, and we've talked about this in previous episodes where witnesses will talk about these creatures pacing, and sometimes they see them, sometimes they don't, sometimes they can just hear the walking, but in other instances, they've seen the creature pacing back and forth, almost like trying to figure out what it's going to do regarding this person, just kind of assessing the situation. When he shines its light on it, it whoops and runs off. So whoop, and then it runs off. And then it happened again. Something was following him. And we hear about this too. There's the paralleling or the escorting. You have a lot of hunters or people who are just in the woods, campers, and they say something was paralleling them. So they're walking and they hear something kind of walking with them. And when they stop, it stops. But it's not an exact one for one. It's sort of like the person stops and a half a second later, the other footsteps stop. So because the creature, whatever's following them, is not them. It's not an exact mirror image. It's not really an echo, but it's just when the person stops, the creature stops, the footsteps stop. So I thought those things were interesting. The other thing, I'm not saying this was a Bigfoot. So I love when witnesses mention this, they're reporting something. Sometimes people will hear something, they hear a tree branch break or something. Oh, that was definitely a Bigfoot. And I don't really have a lot of respect for those types of stories because how do you know? This guy just seems to be saying, I was out there. This weird thing happened. I've never heard anything in the woods like this. I've been out there all my life. I know this area. This has only happened to me twice. I don't know what it was. I'm not saying it was Bigfoot, but here's some information. Here's some data. And again, some of these behaviors sound very much like what we hear in other Bigfoot stories, the pacing and the whooping and the paralleling. So very interesting. And this one does have a follow-up investigation. There's no name here. I talked to the witness for about an hour. He is 45 years old and has been an avid hunter and trapper for over 20 years. So, as I said, experienced, knows the area. This isn't some kid who was easily scared or somebody from the city who didn't know what they were hearing. The witness was sincere and open about the events of that night. He stated that he wasn't sure what he heard those nights, but, quote, it wasn't like anything I've ever heard in those woods before, end quote. He stated that when he shone his light at whatever was following him, it let out a series of 4 to 5 whoops. The witness said the vocalizations sounded almost as if the animal was warning other animals of his presence. Since these possible encounters, the witness had basically given up going into the woods after nightfall or alone. He related other events that have taken place in the past by other family members, but said he would rather have them tell about their experiences. He would have them contact the BFRO if they wanted to tell their experiences. So I don't know if they ever did. I mean, they could be from different parishes, different counties, different states. Who knows? Um, so again, interesting. Um, I think it's interesting that he says the vocalization sounded almost as if the animal was warning other animals, and it's weird how like sometimes we know like what an animal's intent is. You know, when you hear a bark or a growl or a sound, and his interpretation was that it was warning others. So almost like not aggressive towards him and not directed towards him, but almost like warning other possible Bigfoot, like go away, this guy's trying to see me. So interesting story, this one. Like I said, I like it because he doesn't seem to have an agenda here. He's not saying it was Bigfoot, but some of these behaviors do seem a little Bigfooty, if you will. Okay, so story number 3. This is a sighting, so class A, and this is from, and I'm going to butcher this name, and I apologize, Tangipahoa Parish, Tangipahoa Parish, from the year 1981. It was the summer, July 15th. They're saying Tangipahoa Parish. Location details: in a subdivision called Sherrill's Meadows. It was just being developed, and it was an area by an old cattle crossing bridge over a bayou called Yellow Water Creek. Hello, Shoya. Nearest town, a rural area at the time, 6 miles out of town. Nearest road, Highway 22 West, about a quarter mile away. Observed twice when I was 12 years old, I had an encounter. The first time, my cousin and I were riding my mini bike through a new subdivision just north of the Manchac Swamp in Tangiafoa Parish in Louisiana. We saw something about 500 yards away lumbering towards us. It was upright, black, and hairy. I pointed it out to my cousin, and we agreed to turn back. Smart. We stopped while backtracking and looked back, and the thing was lumbering a little faster towards us in the middle of the road. I accelerated, and my cousin fell off. I stopped. He jumped back on and yelled to go. We never looked back and never told anyone for many years. About a month later, the same cousin and I were in the woods behind the same subdivision. It was behind our farm, and were returning from the bayou when, along a train, a bush shook and a big hairy arm protruded out, grabbed some leaves, and went back in. It was late in the day, and the light was fading, so we couldn't see into the bush. We ran the entire 1/4 mile home full speed. It was the last time my cousin entered the woods again. I still haven't learned my lesson. I've had some questionable experiences in recent years while in the Manchac Swamp. Other people have too, but I didn't have enough to go on to conclusively label mine. Also noticed no birds and no sounds. Other stories, yeah, but not too many are anxious to tell. My friend's son and daughter had a similar experience just a few miles east of there 4 years ago on a rainy night. They wouldn't mind relaying their story. Time and conditions, great weather, sunny, some clouds, environment, sandy soil, mixed deciduous and conifers. So an interesting story again here. They're seeing something. They don't talk about how tall it was, but they say it was upright, black and hairy, and it was lumbering towards them. So a horrifying sight. If you're out in the woods and something big and hairy is lumbering at you while you're trying to ride away and it's like chasing you, that's scary. And his cousin fell off the bike and had to get back on. And then a month later, they see a big hairy arm coming out of the bushes, grabbing some leaves. So again, could that have been a bear or a man in a ghillie suit? Or, I mean, possible, but again, these are people who are from the area. I think they would know if this were a bear or another hunter. So very interesting. And again, you have this characteristic of Bigfoot sightings. Uh, in the also noticed section here, no birds and no sounds. So you hear this a lot in Bigfoot sightings and Bigfoot encounters that the woods will go quiet. So all of the little creatures and the mice and the squirrels and the birds and just all the little creatures that flitter about tend to go quiet. It's almost like they know there's something there that to be afraid of, and they all go quiet. So, and I don't know if that's a psychological phenomenon because sometimes we get tunnel vision. Psychologically, your mind focuses in on what you're seeing and everything else just gets blocked out. So is it that the birds aren't making sounds or the squirrels aren't running around or you're just not hearing them because you're so laser focused on what you're experiencing? So that's always a possibility in any Bigfoot sighting, but it is something that is reported time and time again that the ambient sounds will go quiet. And I tend to believe that. I don't always believe that it's a psychological um, tunnel vision, if you will, because a lot of times people report that they noticed the sound before they saw anything. So that they'll be out there and just everything will go quiet. And it's weird because when you're in the woods, there's always sounds. There's always birds. There's always the trees, leaves moving, and there's always like little critters, squirrels and chipmunks and mice and things running through the leaves. You're always hearing stuff. So some of these encounters, people will say, before I even saw anything, I just got a weird feeling because the woods went quiet. And that's unusual. If you're ever out in the woods, if you're ever deep in the woods, for everything to just go quiet like that, it's weird. So to notice that before you see anything, that tells me it's not necessarily tunnel vision, that maybe something is actually happening. So I thought that was interesting. Okay, so story number 4 comes to us from East Feliciana Parish, and this is a Class B. This is just sounds. So strange late night sounds heard near Norwood. And this is from 2001, January 28th, so in the winter. Location details. State Line Road runs between East Feliciana Parish, Louisiana, and Wilkinson County, Mississippi. State Line Road is a gravel road. And as I said, this is all sort of eastern Louisiana. I didn't go the other way. I stayed really around New Orleans and Honey Island Swamp and that area. So all these parishes, all these stories come from eastern Louisiana. Observed. About 2 or 3 years ago, I was rabbit hunting using a flashlight. It was about 10 p.m., and I was walking out of the woods down an old lane. I could hear something following me off to the side in the bushes. At first, I thought it was an armadillo or something like that, but I could not see anything when I would shine my flashlight in that direction. The movement sounded to be only about 10 feet from me. Every time I would stop, it would stop. Whenever I would shine my light over there, I could see nothing. After it followed me for about 150 yards, I got a little scared and turned the flashlight off and took off running to the west of the way to my truck. Other witnesses, rabbit hunting alone at night with a flashlight. Other stories, witness said that he found out that a friend of his had a similar incident in the same area. This was about 10 o'clock at night, partly cloudy, good moonlight, able to see a little bit without a flashlight. Environment, moderate forest with a combination hardwood and pinewood trees. The lane I was on was once used to lead an old house back there that had been abandoned a few years before. So again, this one caught my attention because of the paralleling. So again, I could hear something following me. At first, I thought it was an armadillo. The movement sounded to be only about 10 feet from me. Every time I would stop, it would stop. So as I mentioned earlier, you have these people who will talk about they'll be walking and they hear a second set of footsteps, even though they're by themselves. And then when they stop, the other footsteps stop. And it's not an echo. When you're in the woods, you don't really get echoes of footsteps, you know? So, but you definitely know when something else is in the woods, and you know when it's not your own footsteps. It just sounds different. It's not an exact mirroring. It's just two things walking simultaneously. And then when you stop, the other thing stops. So, very interesting. But again, the same thing with the flashlight. He's shining the flashlight in there. No whoops this time. This creature didn't whoop. So that's interesting. But again, you have the paralleling of something following this person. Follow-up investigation. Again, there's no name here. In the interview with the witness, I asked if he thought there might be someone out there following him. He said, quote, "Ain't no person going to move through that bush like that. There's a lot of briars and it was thick," end quote. I asked what made him think it was not an armadillo, and he said he could see saplings being moved in the brush that were 10 and 15 feet tall. So little armadillo is not going to knock trees over. So here's this person walking and he's hearing footsteps. He's seeing trees move. So something is in the brush following him. Was it a deer? Was it another animal? Uh, of course, it's possible. Um, but the paralleling is interesting. I don't think a deer is going to parallel someone. A big cat might, a bear might, but just strange. Again, these people are out there. They're hunters. These are experienced people who are experienced in the woods and know the behavior of the animals that are out there. Uh, and yet they don't know what they're experiencing. And it's just this sort of one or twice in a lifetime sort of story. So interesting. Okay, so before I go on, I just want to address the bear situation because I've mentioned in other episodes that this could have been a bear, and people have said in the comments, "Oh, well, this county doesn't have bear, or it hasn't had bear in a long time, or it's a very small population of bear," and that is true. And the parishes that I'm dealing with here today in Louisiana don't really have any known bear populations. That being said, bears can travel long distances. So for me, it's more likely that a bear is wandering into these areas than an undiscovered primate being seen, or a weird swamp monster with crocodilian feet and three toes. Uh, so we always have to consider the bear explanation. Again, maybe not in New York City, but you talk about other places that are a little bit more rural, even if there are no big bear populations or any bear populations in these parishes, bears can traverse. Staten Island has tons of deer, and you go back 30, 40 years, and scientists would have said there's no deer here, but people were seeing them. Life finds a way. So bear could be wandering into these places, and it's just something that we have to take into account and consideration. And while not likely, perhaps, very possible, perhaps more possible than an undiscovered cryptid. So we have to keep that in mind. That I know there's probably not huge amounts of bears in these areas, but it's always possible that one wandered in, and I think that's a better explanation than a Bigfoot, and it's probably a better explanation than a chimp that fell off of a traveling circus, because America seems to have billions of those, considering how often that is used to explain Bigfoot sightings. So just wanted to address that with the bears before we move on, because I know I'm going to get comments with people saying there's no bears there. I know, but they could travel there. They could get lost. They could be wandering in there. So said my piece. So let's get on to the next story. This is a Class A. So this is someone seeing something. And this is from East Baton Rouge Parish. From 1982, June 5th, summer. Location details. The area is full of small streams that flow into Beaver Creek. The nearest town is Greenwell Springs. The nearest road is Frenchtown Road. And observed. This happened some time ago, and I've never told anyone this before. I was around 7 years old when this happened. I was at home and had just finished lunch when I went outside to go and play in the woods behind my house. Our house sits on the edge of some pretty dense woods. I was by myself and had just climbed down in a ditch that drained into Beaver Creek. As I climbed out of the ditch onto the other side, I was just looking around when I noticed something looking at me. It was standing in a bamboo thicket, motionless. I remember the wind was blowing around, and I noticed the fur blowing around on its head. It had no expression, it made no noise. I was paralyzed with fear and couldn't move. It had to be on 2 feet because the bamboo we were in was way over my head. From going over this over and over in my head, it was around 5 to 6 feet tall. But the main thing I remember was the stare. I didn't want to run because I did not know if it was going to charge like a dog or what. I slowly backed down into the ditch and climbed backwards up the other side. I was not going to turn my back on it. When I reached the edge of the woods, I ran. I recall the color was a reddish brown. I don't know if it was older kids messing with me, but it sure seemed real to me. Also noticed, for years after this, I have found trees with the bark missing from the ground up 4 feet or so. We do have beavers in the area. Other witnesses, no. Other stories. Other people have heard screams at night. My mother did a few years back when she was putting the trash out one night. She heard an animal running into the woods screaming around the same spot where I ran out of the woods years before. We have found some small deer carcasses also from time to time. The spot is close to the city, but I feel that I saw something out of the ordinary. So he's saying this is somewhere between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. The environment, not dense woods in this spot because of waterways, lots of vegetation, bamboo, ironwood, pine, water oak. So again, a very interesting aspect of this sighting is that he says the creature was around 5 or 6 feet tall. So again, not in that huge Bigfoot range that we typically hear of like 8 or 9 feet or even 7 feet. He's saying 5 or 6 feet tall. Like I said, I'm 6'1", so 5 feet would be smaller than I am. So possible juvenile. But again, down south, we hear that the heights trend on the shorter side. So he was 7 years old at the time. He's saying he doesn't know if it was older kids messing with him. Uh, I don't know if kids got into a suit. But again, as I always say with hoaxes or pranks, because that's a lot of skeptics will say this was a hoax, this was a prank. Where's the payoff? If this were older kids trying to scare this boy, why weren't they teasing him at school the next day, or why didn't he hear about it later and like, oh yeah, we fooled you, we were dressed as Bigfoot. Uh, he says it was reddish. The hair was blowing. It just stood and looked at him. I think if it were other kids trying to scare him, they may have tried to chase him, or they may have moved its arms and like really tried to scare him. This doesn't see, I can't see older kids going through the trouble of getting a Bigfoot costume and standing out in the woods to scare this kid and then just standing there staring at him. It just doesn't really track. Again, if you're there to purposely scare a kid, you're gonna flail, you're gonna yell, you're gonna make noise, you're gonna maybe pretend to chase him, you're gonna charge him or whatever. Just stand there and stare. That sounds more like a creature who is curious and just, maybe as scared of this kid as the kid was scared of it. So I thought that was an interesting detail. Again, critical thinking here. You got to use psychology. You got to, and again, some people who are very quick to dismiss these things don't think about that. They just say, no, this was a hoax. This was a bear. This was an owl. This was whatever they want to explain it as. And they don't see much beyond that. And I'm not saying this was Bigfoot. I'm just saying, think about it critically. Think about if it were older kids who were trying to scare this boy, why were they so stoic about it? Why didn't they bluff charge him? Why didn't they yell and scream and really try to scare this kid? Because that's the whole point. Like when you're trying to scare somebody or pull a prank on them, you're trying to go over the top. You're trying to, and really get them scared and running. And it just doesn't make sense if this was a prank that they're going to go through all this trouble to just stand there. Again, not out of the realm of possibility, of course not, but it doesn't quite make sense for older kids. That's not how kids operate typically. They're not subtle. And this is a very subtle encounter. So it doesn't really track. Again, I'm not saying it was Bigfoot, but older kids messing with him, that doesn't really ring true to me. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Okay, so the last story I'm going to share is actually two stories. So pretty cool. From the same witness. This is from Washington Parish, and thank God that's a name I can pronounce. So this one, a hunter recalls finding giant footprints as a boy and recently heard a strange vocalization while hunting hogs late at night on the outskirts of Varnado. So this happened in 1991 and then again in 2008. Summer. Nearest town is Varnado. Nearest road is Highway 436. Observed. On my family's rural 3,200-acre Louisiana farm along the Pearl River, we found 16-inch tracks in the sand dune from the lake, then up a sandbank and over a flat area of sand, retreating down into the thick swamp. What startled us really wasn't the size, but the stride. The stride was double our stride. The tracks approximately were 8 feet apart. I believe in Bigfoot, and I know all we've ever seen was these tracks, but I know what I saw was not made by a human. My family has farmed this land since 1850 and never knew anyone to fake tracks. We keep tabs on who uses the property, mostly our family. We've heard strange sounds before. Actually, last was made by me on November 15th, 2008 at 11:30 p.m. while hunting hogs at night. So actually last was not made by him, but I guess heard by him. So some of these are written a little weird. I thought it may have been a cougar, but after hearing similar sounds of primates, it may have been that type. Other witnesses, my aunt, uncle's twin brother. My uncle, by the way, is a retired college professor. The environment is between a lake and swampy pine forest. Okay, so they're finding 16-inch tracks, which are big, in the sand dune, and then over into a swamp. So, but they're also saying the stride. The stride was approximately 8 feet apart. So this is something big, a long stride, possibly running, and they've heard weird sounds. So let's get into the follow-up investigation, see if we can get some more information. So this follow-up investigation was done by BFRO investigator Connor Amay. I hope I'm saying that right. The first incident actually happened in 1988 when the witness was 10 years old. His father and a friend were coon hunting on a calm, clear night when they heard a sound described as a woman being mauled, quote unquote, come from the direction of an old Indian mound on the property. So to stop there for a second, the woman being mauled, we hear that a lot, and we hear that from other animals too. Other, a fox, a fisher, cougars, bobcats, they can all make these sounds that sound like a person being murdered, a woman being murdered, a baby being murdered. You hear this a lot. So it's just a very high-pitched, blood-curdling scream. So we'll come back to that. In the summer of 1991, the witness's aunt came running up to the house talking about giant tracks down by the lake. Near the lake, one of a few on the property, they found tracks going straight up a steep 30-foot high sandbank. On the top of the bank, they found about 50 man-like footprints in the sand going towards a thick, swampy area. The footprints were twice as wide as the witness's size 10 foot and about 5 inches longer. The stride was attempted by the uncle, who was 6'6", and he could not get close. In 2008, the witness was in a deer stand hunting wild hogs. Around 11:30 p.m. is when he heard a long howl from about an eighth of a mile away. He described it as similar to a howler monkey, yet siren-like, and assured me he has never heard anything like that in the woods before. He left the woods soon after that. I would have too. This happened about a quarter mile from where his father had an incident in 1988. The witness is a lifelong hunter and outdoorsman. He received his first shotgun at the age of 5. He has spent countless hours in the wilderness and knows the sights and sounds of the woods. I found him to be an honest and sincere man. The 3,200-acre property consists of raw southern wilderness and abuts the densely forested Pearl River. This wildlife corridor extends into the range of the legendary Honey Island swamp monster, which is about 50 miles to the south. So again, you have people who are familiar with the area. This is a guy who's had a gun since he was very little. Different way of life down there, and they are outside a lot. And this is a huge property, 3,200 acres, and tracks 50 feet, 50 footprints, 50 feet prints in the sand. I mean, that's a lot of footprints. So, and again, I'll go back to the hoax explanation. If somebody was on their property trespassing and wearing Bigfoot, fake Bigfoot feet on their feet and hoaxing them, where's the payoff? And again, these are people with guns. It's a huge property. Any of these areas, these are, these more rural areas where people have land. I mean, it's posted land. They don't want people coming on their land and hunting and shooting guns and possibly injuring a family member or a family pet. It's private property. So to go on someone's land is risky. You're going to, you might get shot. And I mean, we go in places in Gettysburg where you have the battlefield, and then on the other side of the road, it's posted land. You can't go over there. Like if you go in there, you'll get confronted. Somebody will come up to you and chase you out. And if you're going in there wearing big footprints and probably doing this at night so you don't get seen, but if someone sees you and they have a shotgun on them, they're gonna shoot you. So a foolish game if this is a hoax. But again, where's the payoff? Where is someone saying, "Hey, I did this, ha ha ha, I fooled you"? I don't know. Again, it doesn't mean it's impossible. Just a bit improbable that this was uh, a hoaxer. So, but again, no one's seeing anything here. The scream, a woman being mauled, that could have been any number of things. There are a lot of known animals in the forest and the woods that make sounds like that are unsettling, but not Bigfoot. And again, until we see Bigfoot making these screams, we can't really attribute Bigfoot to that. Same with tree knocks. We just don't know. I mean, what else can pick up a piece of wood and bang it against a tree? Something with opposable thumbs. But that doesn't prove that it's Bigfoot. It could just be a person. It could be something else that we just don't understand yet. But um, the screams, interesting. I've heard screams upstate New York that sounded very much like this. The howler monkey sort of thing, or the screeching monkey. And we don't have monkeys in upstate New York, so what was it that sounded exactly like a monkey? Um, so very interesting. So no sighting here, but again, close to Honey Island Swamp. And I chose this because I actually passed by Honey Island Swamp years ago. We went to a friend's wedding down in New Orleans, and we stayed there for a night or two, and then we went over to Baton Rouge, and we were driving, and there's signs for Honey Island Swamp, and I was like, we got to stop. And we were kind of on, a time constraint and a schedule, and we wanted to get to the hotel before dark, so we didn't venture too much into the woods of the swamp. Um, but it was cool to just pull over and just stand on the edge of the swamp and just imagine what could be in there. And again, as a city boy, New York City and Staten Island, we have some swampy areas here, but I mean, you walk half mile and you're hitting houses and roads. I mean, it's not very dense or deep or remote here. Like you're gonna run into civilization pretty quickly. But down there, like you could just look into the swamp and we're checking on the maps and everything, and you could just tell like this goes on for a long way, and we're not going to be bumping into anybody. So I have to see if I can find those pictures and insert them here, because I did take a few pictures of Honey Island Swamp. I think the sign, and I think just some of the swamp, which were really cool, because I just don't get down that way. I unfortunately don't travel a lot. I can't. I don't have a job that allows for traveling, so I'm pretty much stuck here for the most part. Um, and if I was going to travel, I don't know if I just go to a swamp. Um, I would love that. I don't know if anybody else who knows me would want to go to a swamp with me. If you do, let me know. Um, so that'll wrap it up for this episode, guys. Again, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for your comments. And if you liked the video, you liked the podcast, give us a review, give us a thumbs up, click the like button. All of that stuff helps the channel, helps the algorithms, YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts. The algorithms can be a little weird. So the more reviews we have, the more stars or the thumbs up or the likes or the subscribes, any of that will help us with the algorithm and helps bump up the channel. So if you do like what you're hearing here, we'd appreciate it. I'd appreciate it. My co-hosts who are on many times, John and Scott and Josh, we'd all appreciate it. We work hard on these shows. John is always putting together very detailed notes before the show. He works a lot harder on our episodes than I do. I just kind of come in and wing it, but he's always, well prepared. So I always appreciate John for being well prepared. And Scott's just a wealth of knowledge, as is Josh. So they really help me out. So just asking you guys to help us out with the thumbs up, click the like button, click subscribe, leave us a review, especially on Apple. We'd appreciate that there as well. You can check out our merch store. I'll put a link to that in the description below. We have hoodies and hats and t-shirts and all sorts of cool stuff. And if you have a story that you'd like to share, shoot me an email, jason@oddanduntold.com. And you could either just email me the story and I can read it on air as I've done these stories tonight. Or if you want to come on the show, you can come on the show. I can keep you anonymous. You don't have to show your face. We can blur that out. We can black that out. I can change your name. So if you want to come on and tell and you want to be yourself, you can be yourself. I've had many people on before. If you just want to email me your story and have me read it on air, I can do that. I will keep all of your information completely confidential. So until next time, everybody, question everything. I believe in this stuff. I know most of you do as well, probably, but we still have to question everything, question every story, question every detail. Like I said with the bears, that has to be considered. Even if bears aren't really frequenting that area, it's a much more likely possibility than an 8 foot tall undiscovered primate. So we have to question everything. So we will see you next week, everybody. Rock and roll.